You guys see my screen?
It's loading for me. Okay, I can see it now. Can you try showing the second slide just to make sure that they're um, showing properly? Yeah, okay, all good.
All right. Welcome to the public deep dive for our development team. And I want to take this opportunity to explain how the new Collab.Land API Flow work with the industry standard called oAuth2. And if you're familiar with Facebook login or Google login, we're going to have a very similar flow here. Yeah, so maybe before we jump into that, to give a little context, so Collab.Land does as a bunch of bots on Discord, Telegram, and we are happy receiving so many tokenized communities and members. Um, then since then, more and more developers are asking for the API access because they know the communities and the users have built some knowledge with Collab.Land ecosystem, and you want to see that knowledge under the authorization of the corresponding data owners, such as the community admins and users, right? And the Collab.Land also offers some services that uh, expose some of the infrastructure we built to support our token getting issues, such as the token getting APIs, which does not directly involve a Collab.Land community or user. And these APIs are becoming a service that's available to developers so that they don't have to rebuild the infrastructure by themselves and just focus on the UI UX they have to build for their user base. So from the API angle, we start with this simple access control, which is so-called API key. But definitely the limitation of the API key, because the API key is kind of like the root password, right? And we have to make sure the client application can have the ability to protect the secrets of the API key, but it's often a challenge for the client applications. And secondly, is like the API key only represents the third-party application itself. It cannot be used to connect to a user or a community admin. So that makes it pretty difficult to surface some of the APIs that requires explicit authorization from the user or from the community. For example, a user might want to share the verified wallets they have with Collab.Land to a third-party app, right? But if the user cannot be part of the authentication and authorization flow for the API call, then the user don't have a voice, which we don't like. And we fully respect the privacy of the user and make sure any API data access to the user data should be, uh, you know, uh, explicitly authorized by the user. So that's why we, evolve our API story by adopting the oAuth2 protocol, which is the industry standard to third-party authentication and authorization, right? And oAuth2, even though it's very popular, but not a lot of developers fully understand what's happening behind the scenes and how they can fully utilize the oAuth2 flow to do authentication and authorization. So in today's talk, I want to kind of give some technical details and explore the different flows we support and run a couple demos to showcase what you can do with our new API flow and how the newly launched that portal can play a critical role to onboard developers so that the developers can really register client applications and get the corresponding credentials to interact with the API flow we have, and also try to give some inspirations what the developer can do with our API as a product. Okay, jumping to that. So the first diagram kind of showcase like how the different components you would expect from us to as a server side implementation, right? So starting from the API perspective, the bottom right is so-called as resource server. It's a fancy term saying you expose some REST APIs, and then that REST APIs will, have access to certain protected resources. For example, from the user's point of view, like all the user information, such as how many communities you are in, what are the connected wallets you have with Collab.Land, and what verifiable credentials you receive as part of the Collab.Land journey. Right? Those are the protected resources owned by the user. Then from the community perspective, you manage the token getting rules, right? So we have the command center as a web UI for you to define these rules. And what's happening behind the scenes is the web UI basically making API calls on behalf of the community admin so that you can add new rules, remove existing rule, or modify existing rules, right? So those APIs kind of represent protected resources. And from the oAuth2 perspective, it requires to have a so-called access token to interact with these API endpoints. And that access token not only used as a credential to secure the API access, but also give a pointer to which third-party application that API call is made from, and also who's the Collab.Land user that client application works on behalf, right? Uh, so that's kind of the resource side, and we call that a resource server, and then mapping to the Collab.Land infrastructure, very much as our API server. And on the production side, we surface that through HTTPS api.collab.land, right? So that's a resource server. Then to support the OAuth2 protocol, it has a so-called like a authorization server, but physically speaking, the resource server and the authorization server can be hosted by the same server. And actually, that's the case for our API server. So we have some specialized endpoint exposed from our API server that function as the authorization server. Basically, two critical endpoint for OAuth2 flow. One is so-called authorization flow. Authorization flow is like say, hey, it's a party, you need to redirect user to Collab.Land's login system and identify themselves. Then also show the dialogue, like what permissions the third-party application is asking for, and you have the choice to grant that permission or reject that request. Right? So that's the first step for the OAuth2 flow. Like, even you use a third-party application, then you have to go back to the Collab.Land login system, because that kind of decouple the Collab.Land credential from the third-party credential, and the third-party application is not part of that process when it comes to the credential processing. So you are guaranteed you log in with Collab.Land, and that has nothing to do directly with the client application itself. And all the password, all the login credential you have only happens between you and the Collab.Land's authorization server, right? So that's such a relief, so that we allow all the third-party apps to, redirect user to our system and then gain that authorization. So that's the authorization endpoint. And the second endpoint called token endpoint, because for certain flows, you need to get an intermediate credential from the authorization flow. Then you can have the client application to request access token through the token endpoint using that intermediate credential. And that usually happens, your client application has a backend, and that backend could do server-to-server communication with our token endpoint, right? So once you have the token endpoint, then toward the end, the client application will receive a so-called access token. And that access token has some information attached to it. And for our case, we store that access token into a Redis backend. So it's an opaque string the front end will get, and that access token will point to a state, Redis that tells you, hey, here's my XYZ application working on behalf of Raymond with this Disco ID, and here's a list of permissions Raymond grant to this third-party application so that the third-party application can make an API calls to see Raymond's connected wallet with Collab. So that's oAuth2 overview. And if you have any questions, please post that to the chat, and hopefully we have some time to address any of the questions coming up from this whole conversation. Number two, I want to show the most popular flow for the front-end applications, how the front-end application as a third party that works closely with Collab.Land to gain access to the user data or like the community data, or even do some mutations on behalf of the user or the community. Right? So imagine you build a web application, right? So that's your client application. Then you have to register with our dev portal. And then once you register with our dev portal, you'll get a so-called like a client ID back to your application. And then meanwhile, you need to tell our system when you finish the login authorization flow, which URL your Collab application will receive the access token. So that's called redirect URL. Sometimes people call that callback URL. And actually, that's a security protection because we want to make sure when you have a third-party application and that token only comes back to your third-party application, not being intercepted by another hacker or like a phishing site that have you log in with Collab and have the token being passed to that phishing site, right? Okay, so the flow is like say, hey, from the client application perspective, you first building a redirect URI, and then that redirect URI will have information about your client ID, right? And you tell the system what scopes you want to ask from the user to give you the permission. Then you specify a redirect URI, say once everything is either successful or the user reject the flow, what URL you will gain control again after that flow. So the request token will go to the authorization server. Then we have this authorization endpoint. Then your browser will be redirected to a login page from Collab.Land. And the user will log in. Then toward the end, the user will either approve or deny the access to a third party because that dialog will show what information, what operation the third party will do on behalf of you if you approve, right? So you have that chance to make sure you give the right permission to the right third party app. So if everything's good, then the authorization server will generate so-called like a access token. The access token will coming back to the front application using a hash parameter. The beauty of a hash parameter is like it's only visible to the browser. It's not even visible to the backend. So that kind of gives the front application that isolation. Then of course, once you get an access token, you can start to construct an API call and making the call into our API, which is hosted by the resource server. And of course, the resource server will verify all the information behind the access token and decide if you will have the ability to make that corresponding API call. So that's a implicit token flow. And I'm going to run a quick demo after a couple slides here. So that's usually very meaningful for the front application to use our oAuth2 flow. Second one is called authorization flow. And this one involves a little bit backend for your client application because the token is coming back in two steps. So the first step is very similar. You still redirect the user to log in with Collab.Land, right? Then you get the user approval. But this time around, we don't give you the access token directly, but we kind of make a callback to your backend with this so-called authorization code. And this is a one-time use authorization code to avoid any replay interception. Then the client application will have to do a server-to-server call, say, hey, I got this authorization flow code from the user. Can you give me an access token? Then the client application will make an API call to our token endpoint, then we'll receive a token on the backend. And then the backend can use the corresponding access token to call the APIs. So that's really useful for the backend application, because when you try to exchange a code for the token, you need to present some credentials. And that credential is actually the client ID and the client secret. And for even advanced security, that could be potentially, you know, private public key infrastructure, and you can sign a JWT and use that JWT to authenticate and authorize your client application itself. Then that will allow us to generate a token. So this additional security step will protect the user further more, because the client application not only need to pre-register the callback URL, but they also need to own the client ID and the client secret so that they can get the real token, right? So that's a differentiation from the first flow. Then, as part of this ongoing conversation, because there's going to be an expiration day request associated with the access token, right? Say you will get 1 hour, uh, uh, lifetime for your access token. So the refresh token flow was created to allow the backend to backend renewal of the token, right? Because sometimes you don't want to force the user to log in back using the UI again and again, and you want to allow this automatic renewal of the access token. So that's how the refresh token, and the refresh token will be coming back as part of the authorization code flow, and you can keep that refresh token with your server. And then later on, if the initial access token expires, then you can actually use the refresh token to get a new access token. Okay, so that's the so-called refresh token flow. Another flow I want to fly through here is sometimes your client application does not need to interact with a user, right? So imagine you build a token getting website, and that token getting website already collect information about the wallet address that the login user have, and a bunch of token getting rules you want to enforce. And in that case, really you are making an API call into Collab.Land, and that API call does not involve any community or any user, right? So for that case, the only requirements that you have to prove you own that client application credential, which is the client ID and the client secret. So we have this flow which allows you to request an access token on behalf of the application itself without any user involved. Then that access token could be used to invoke some of the service, such as the token getting API, which only requires the client application identity. Okay? So that's a so-called client credential flow. This should be a replacement to the API key, because for the API key, it's like a root password, right? So you get it, you use it, but for like a client credential flow, you kind of make it consistent, because toward the end of the day, you are getting an access token, and that access token is not very different from the access token you get from other flows. So API key, I feel in the future, we might want to deprecate it, but just keep that as a convenient method, because a lot of front-end developer only familiar with the API key, but from the security and the other perspective, it's not very optimal. All right, so I talked quite a bit of the different flows, and I want to run a quick demo so that you can see how these different flows actually works, right? So I'm going to launch a quick demo on our QA system. So I built a very simple, like a oAuth2 playground. And this playground allows me to exercise some of the oAuth2 flow. Say I have this client, ID called Collab.Land _demo, right? And this one, it's really coming from the dev portal. So I'm going to show the dev portal for the QA system as well. Then we log in with your credential. In my case, I'm going to use Discord. And here, the first application you see is a client Collab.Land demo application, and I give them a special ID to make it easy to memorize, which is Collab.Land _demo. and we don't see the credentials here. I want to also show the details for this client application. So what matters here is you have a logo icon, and you from the security perspective, the most critical one is you allow the definition or pre-registration of the different you know redirect UI, because this makes sure no other third party can gain control of the access token. So make sure you configure the redirect UI correctly. And of course, the one I've been using is very much like this one. Then we're going to surface more constraints in the future, like say, when you have the traffic coming from the website, right? So there's certain HTTP headers, such as the, you know, the origin header and the referral header. All runtime already support that kind of constraints, but all UI will surface that in the future as well. So the takeaway is like you are getting this, client ID as a starting point, right? Then we can let's exercise this first demo, which is the implicit token flow I was talking about. So let's click on this, and you see the pop up here because I intentionally have this pop up tell you how we interact with the authorization endpoint from our oAuth2 server. And that endpoint is like a HTTPS API-QA Collab.Net, and the path is auth2/authorize. So that's our authorization endpoint for the auth2 server. Then the critical information you have to specify is like, what client application ID you use, and what's the redirect URI you expect the token coming from. Then, of course, in this case, we have to specify the response type as equals to token representing this particular flow. Then another piece of information critical is the scope. Scope basically say, hey, we have so many APIs, and the user and the community owns different resources, and we want to have that fine-grained access control authorized by the resource owners to the third-party app. And this is the extraction from the third party. Say, hey, for my third-party application to be fully functional, I expect you to give me these permissions. Right? Then I can do okay. So that kind of goes to our login site. So from now on, the third party is out of the picture. Anything you do here, it's only happen between the user and the Collab.Land, right? So this is the beauty of oAuth2. You don't have to share your password with the third party. You don't have to share any credential with the third party, right? So you log in directly with the social truth, which is Collab.Land. Then we're going to do a Discord login here. And the reason we do a Discord login is we mostly support this different platform identity for the user, right? And they can choose Discord, Telegram, and in the future we are adding other login providers such as Google, GitHub or Passkey, signing with Ethereum. But the whole purpose here is to identify you with Collab.Land as a user, right? So this dialogue is really interesting because it shows, hey, here's the demo application. Remember, in the dev portal, we have a URL, right? And that's the project URL will be linked here because as a user, right? You want to double check if the third party application is a valid application you can trust. Then you can check out the link by yourself. Then we have this icon, which is coming from the dev portal as well. Then this list of things represent the human readable description of the different scopes. So this is a permission you have to pay attention to as a user, right? Then we also have the checkbox say, hey, you want to remember my decision for this app. So the idea is some users don't want to see this pop up all the time. Then they can just say, okay, I really trust this third-party application, and I want to give that third-party application the permission unless I revoke it later on. Right? So for now, I need just authorize for this particular session, and then I'm going to click authorize. And then, as you can tell, now the control get redirected back to the browser. And these are the things you need to pay attention to, right? So first of all, you have this hash code. So hash is a special construct for the URL that only disclose the information after the hash to the browser. So the backend for this particular URL does not even see the access token, right? So that's kind of have a direct channel between your browser and the Collab.Land side. Then you have access to this access token. Then you get this, token type in the state. So state is really for correlation. For example, if the client want to kind of say, hey, I have a user ID and I'm doing the same for my user. So I can pass a state to our auth2 authorization server. And then later on, when the callback happens, the same state will coming back as is. So that could be used as a correlation between the two uh, different sites. Now you have this access token, right? So we can actually start to access the user profile. Let's say you click on the user profile, you see all the information coming from Disco, right? Or you can actually see the wallet I have with Collab. So this will give you all the wallets Raymond connected with Collab on the QA system. And here's the URL of the API call, right? So this kind of conclude the flow we have for the implicit token access. And of course, we can try other flows. For example, let's say we want to try the authorization code flow. This will be slightly different. And as you can tell here, still going to the authorization endpoint. Then we have the redirect UI, everything is the same. But now the difference is we have this response type equals to code, right? So we can say, okay, let's redirect that. Then we go to this new login flow. It's the same. So I'm going to turn on the developer mode so that we can show some of the traffic. So now I authorize it. And this is still the Disco side of the flow. Then I try to authorize this flow. So when you authorize it, we make API calls to our backend to keep that information to the backend to represent that user authorization. And if you check the, remember my decision, then we will save that decision into our database. Then the authorization code coming back to the browser. So the browser actually makes a call to our auth2 token endpoint, right? And if you look at here, it's talking to this particular URL with a post. And then we have a payload. And this payload is use the URL encoded format like a form. So basically, we are sending some information back. And here you see my client secret, but I'm going to reset from here, right? So say I'm going to reset from this, reset credentials, right? So I can reset from here. So I'm going to do that later on. Now you get an access token. Then we actually say, okay, now we use the access token associated with the user profile or the wallet. So let's click on the wallet again. Then you get back the same information. So there's one additional step in that whole flow that requires you to, now I try to, do that same authorization code again. Now you're getting an error. Why? Because the authorization code is supposed to be one-time use, right? So if you try to use it again, you will say, okay, this is a, invalid authorization code because it's already being used. So that short period of time to make sure the handshake between the third party and the auth2 server hosted by Collab.Land will be a one-time use. So that's kind of coming from the spec itself. The other flows, for example, like the client credential flow, then that requires to have the, so I can try this flow real quick as well. Like then you say, okay, get credential, and probably I didn't have the right credential there. So if you look at here, then we're getting wrong information here. So the request body is not valid, must have a code. Oh, actually, I probably point that to a wrong URL. So I can fix that. Okay, so that's kind of the client credential flow. Then one thing I want to show a special one is so-called like authorization code with a PKCE. So what happens is for some of the mobile app, you don't have the ability to fully protect your client secret, and to allow to prevent people coming and steal your authorization code. So there's a trick called PKCE. It's part of the extension to the oAuth2 flow that shows, okay, there's a secret exchange between the client application and the oAuth2 server. So basically, you're sending us shared secret when you try to request the access token from the authorization code. Now, whenever the code coming back, the code is actually attached to that secret, only knows between the third party and the Collab.Land side. Then later on, you will use that to retrieve the token. So let me run that demo real quick, see if it's still working. So you see the other difference here is like say, hey, you want to get authorization code, but you present a so-called like a code challenge. And in this case, basically, we'll share the challenge between us and the oAuth2 server hosted by Collab. Right? Then you say, okay, let's do this. Then you get the same flow. And you go back to here. Then you authorize again. And look at this token flow. So now the payload. So you can see there's additional information beyond the client secret because now you have this so-called code verified. So the code verified is a shared secret between your app and the Collab.Land oAuth2 server, and this information will be used to retrieve the access token from the this code. Right? If somebody steal your code and they don't know this code verified because this is a really a transit secret you generate from the front end from your third-party application, and use that as a handshake with the Collab.Land oAuth2 side. So this will guarantee additional security nature if you decide to use this flow. All right, so I pretty much run through all the different flows, and I want to go back to another demo because for our API server, we always have this, so-called API Explorer, right? So I want to go to the API Explorer, and I'm going to access the oAuth2 flow directly from the API Explorer. Let's say I want to see all my wallets again, right? So this is the method I want to invoke. But if I invoke this directly, like say I try out, right? And I say execute, and we expect to see a failure because I don't have any authentication to prove I'm Raymond and here's my credential. So how do we do that in the Explorer? So there's a little button here. And once you click on this button, you actually see the different options you have here. And one of the options is you can specify the oAuth2 flow, right? So let's assume I'm going to, try to read the user wallet, and I'm going to give the client ID to the Explorer. Then I say authorize it. So let's see what's happening. So the authorize actually will redirect us to a login flow. And this is very much the same flow I just demonstrated from the oAuth2 playground. And you go to here, you authorize it, and again, it comes back and say, okay, now you have this flow, and the flow now gives you an access token, right? So now we have an access token into my Explorer, and let me try it again. Now you are getting back the response because if you look at here, we actually capture that access token from that oAuth2 redirect. So very much like this oAuth2 flow is fully integrated with our API Explorer, right? So that will allow you to exercise some of the API calls directly from the API Explorer as a purpose of testing and trying out some of the APIs. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all the content I have for today. And I just have to, dump a lot of information here, but hopefully this will be meaningful to all the developers. Then once you have, more questions, feel free to post to the Dev General channel on Discord, and we try to be responsive there as much as we can. And we'll probably improve our documentation to have more information to explain the different flows to help the developers to get off the hurdles. Let's see if there's any questions. Chibi, do you see any questions from the chat?
Let's see. I don't see any questions right now. There is a comment here saying great demos. Totally agree. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and you'll be brought up to the stage. You can do any of those for any questions. I see Frosty is typing, so let's see if he has any questions. And I think we're also ready to distribute the Bow app if it's a good time to do that. What do you think, Raymond?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And let's get a forum pop going while see if there's any technical questions. And of course, the door is open. Like you can always post your questions to the Dev General channel on the Discord server.
Absolutely. I'll give it one more minute just to see if there's any questions while I make sure that everything's good and set to distribute the Bow app. And in the meantime, I also wanted to give one last reminder that we have a celebration Bow app for the launch of our dev portal. And I'll quickly link you guys to it in case that you want to claim this Bow app. Today is the last day to do the steps in order to get it. And for this, all you need to do is to go to our dev portal, take a screenshot, and then post the screenshot in our dev portal Bow app. So I'm a link.
Quickly, address a question from Frosty. He said he missed the first half of the session. And of course, we live stream the session to YouTube. And I believe Candy posts something which gives some pointer to the YouTube channel we have.
That's right. So I believe that the recording is automatically posted to YouTube, or it's available on YouTube right now. So yes, first you can check on that, and we'll also add it to the recordings post here in the Discord, likely later today. Yeah, you can check it out whenever you have a moment. And thanks for asking.
Cool. Yeah, and I can also share the slides to the Dev General channel afterward as well.
That would help, yeah.
By the way, we pretty much transform some of the in-house web applications we built, such as the command center, the dev portal, to use the new oAuth2 flow. And you can use that as a kind of like a reference implementation, or like just play out with the oAuth2 demo we show from the system. So that will give you that starting point, and questions and feature requests are welcome.
For sure.
Oh, by the way, I think Kenny, our DevRel developer, actually created a so-called Clap Dash demo application, and that kind of access the whole flow to allow people to log in with Collab.Land and show the knowledge they have with Collab.Land, such as what the communities, the login user are part of it, are they a community administrator, then getting a list of wallets they have with the Collab.Land UI fashion. I can dig that out, that URL somewhere. I believe Kenny has that GitHub repo. Let me see if I can still find it right away.
I think that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, so Penny has that. Yeah, so it's actually right here. So this is a repo he actually created that demo application, and I believe he deployed to. I'm not sure if he has that URL showing up here, but he has a test deployment. Yeah. So I'm going to post this to the dev general channel as well.
Amazing. And now I'll take this opportunity to share the secret phrase to claim the POAP with everyone in the audience.
And I'm going to
So,
stop sharing to make sure.
mhm, sounds good. All right. So, for you guys in the audience, if you would like to claim today's Dev Deep Dives POAP, we will be using the POAP mini app for this, of course. So, you'll need to write down slash POAP claim in the chat of the server. Again, slash POAP claim. And that will ask you for a claim phrase, which is Collab.Auth. So all lowercase with no spaces in between. Collab as in Collab.Land, all lowercase, and then auth as in authentication. Is the first four letters. So that'll be COLLABAUTH. Collab us. Once that you write it down, hit enter and you'll receive a code to claim your POAP. I see that James claimed already. Thank you, James. And you guys, please let us know if you are able to claim successfully. One more time, the secret phrase is Collab.Auth. That would be COLLABAUTH. So collab, just the same as in Collab.Land, and then auth as in authenticate or authentication. All lowercase and with no spaces in between. Please let us know if it worked. If you have any issues with the claim, we can also send you a code directly. And with that, I think that we are good to end the call. Just checking if anyone else has any questions, but if not, or if you guys check the recordings later and have any questions for previous sessions or for this session, if you go back to it, please feel free, as Raymond mentioned, to bring them up in the Dev General, and we'll be very happy to assist you in there as well. Yeah, having said that, I think that we're good to wrap things up. What do you think, Raymond?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks again for joining, and hopefully we can make that even more interactive with the future, and bring your interest and topic to the channel so that we can plan ahead to make sure we address your need.
Yeah, for sure. If anyone has any recommendations or suggestions on topics that you would like to see or to have explained during these sessions, also feel free to bring them up, as well as any feedback that you have or any comments are well received and appreciated. So yeah, thanks Raymond for mentioning that. And thanks everyone for joining today's session. Um, these are always fantastic. So thank you, Raymond, for that. And we'll see you all next time. Goodbye for now.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye bye.